Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next stage at City Lights Theater Company. So happy to have you all here tonight. My name is Rebecca Wallace, and I host and produce this series. This is our online series, streaming and video series, and it's been going weekly throughout the pandemic. And then starting next month, we're going to go monthly. I'm going to have, instead of 4 smaller events, we're going to have one larger event every month as we prepare to reopen the theater this fall for in-person shows. It has been fantastic to have this as a series. We've been able to connect with people from all over the place, as far away as Finland and India, and of course, many different time zones. We highlight different artists on every broadcast, from playwrights to visual artists to musicians, and it's been really, really wonderful. I'm excited to be here tonight and to bring two different types of art together, the theater and visual art slash video art. I'm so excited to have Kathryn Wade here from the San Jose Museum of Art and Kirsten Brandt, playwright and director of the play that is going to reopen City Lights this fall, Coded. Thank you for being here. Thank you all. They are both going to talk briefly about their two works of art that we are here to speak about tonight. Then I'm going to show a little video slideshow so you can see some images from the play Coded and the exhibition that Kathryn's talking about. We'll have a nice long interview and we'll have an audience Q&A afterwards. I will be here in the chat the whole time, so if you've got questions that can't wait till the end, feel free to type them in, or any technical issues. We also have Robin Treen here from the museum, who knows everything about the museum. If you have questions about opening hours or visiting or anything like that, the chat is the place for you. So why don't we start off with Kathryn Wade? She's an assistant curator at the San Jose Museum of Art. And tonight she's talking about oh my goodness, I just asked you how to pronounce it. Steigerwald. How's that? Okay. Factory of the Sun, video installation that opens next month. Give us a little intro, Kathryn.
Thanks. Thank you all. Yeah, we are very excited at SJMA to open Hito Steigerwald's Factory of the Sun on August 6th. And it's a landmark video installation that explores the flow of data in our current digital landscape. Hito was initially inspired by a quote from Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto that describes machines as made of pure sunlight. So in the video, Steigerwald explains, our machines are made of pure sunlight, electromagnetic frequencies, light pumping through fiberglass cables. The sun is our factory. And this premise of machines made of pure sunlight is not a romantic one. For Hito, she's long attuned herself to the power of images and their electronic reproduction to manipulate our worldview. And like I said, it's an installation, it's an immersive installation. And upon entry, one feels as though they've been transported into a kind of lurid cyberspace, glowing in a grid of blue LED lights. And meanwhile, on the screen, the distinctions between reality and fiction dissolve in a kind of montage of YouTube dance videos, drone surveillance footage, video games, fake news, and real documentation of student uprisings. Notions of time and space expand and collapse within this virtual world, reflecting our contemporary reality and the ceaseless transmission of images and information and misinformation around the globe. The narrative itself tells a kind of surreal story of workers whose forced dance moves in a motion capture studio are turned into artificial sunshine. And the story is based on an actual YouTube phenomenon. A studio assistant's brother, one of Hito's studio assistant's brothers, viral homemade dance video was used as a model for Japanese anime characters. And around the same time, there was a story about an experiment at the CERN nuclear research facility that claimed to have measured a particle traveling faster than the speed of light. So in this imaginative reality spun from Haraway's theory, a glowing grid of light extends from the screen into the physical space of the gallery itself and materializes a different world in 3 dimensions. Steigerwald is thinking about modern warfare, corporate culture, anti-capitalist resistance movements, and they're all kind of played out here in these digitally embodied characters that we can think of as avatars and bots and proxies for the human viewers who are in the gallery watching the video from reclined beach chairs. It's really less of a morally laden warning about the future, so much as a trajectory of the current moment in which we knowingly surrender all of our personal data to corporate interest so that we might participate in the digital landscape.
Wild.
And yeah, we're super excited to be opening this piece against August 6th.
Fascinating. And I'm going to show you some images from that in a minute. Kirsten, tell us about your play Coded. For those of you who don't know, this is kind of the second opening almost for Coded. Coded was slated to open in March 2020. And I don't have to tell you what happened. We had 2 preview performances and then we were shut down right before opening night. And so we're so excited to be bringing Coded back. Kirsten, tell us all about your play.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and talking about this show that is so meaningful to me and the company, particularly since we sort of just had 2 previews and then had to close the doors, and now we get to reopen. But it also is a chance to sort of reassess thematically what was going on in the wake of our digital lives. We were so relying on our computers. So Coded follows a character named Jerry, who was trolled mercilessly. She was a game designer who spoke out about misogyny in the gaming industry, which created a huge backlash. She was trolled, she was doxxed, she was swatted, and she had to basically go into hiding for her own safety. And the play begins as she has reemerged with a team of women to create something on par with what we would consider the Holodeck if you're a Star Trek fan, or the Oasis if you're a Ready Player One fan. She has figured this out. She's figured out a way to do this. And she and her team are confronting their traumas with, again, the backlash that's happened to all of them in being women in this field, and are trying to get funding, get a VC interested. Meanwhile, the guy who sort of started the whole attack against her has found out what she's up to and is also like, oh, I can do that too, hot on her tail to beat her in this. And so it is sort of this race against time as to who can get the funding and who can actually push this idea forward. But within this holodeck idea, we get a chance to play with a game within the play. Normally in theater, you have like a play within the play. Now we have a game within the play. And so we get to play with virtual space and what it means to have a virtual reality game space and what that game could be and how that could be beneficial to humanity. And one of the big issues when Lisa Millette asked me to write a play for the theater, we talked about women in gaming, but we also talked about climate justice. And so it kind of allowed me an opportunity to create a game in my head that also dealt with climate catastrophe. And as we're looking at what's happening right now across the country and the planet, it's really timely. And so sort of these speculative futures as to what is going to happen to the planet. So it's kind of this lovely sort of race against time, but also dives really deep into technology and what it means to be a woman in a predominantly male industry. Even though today I just read that the recent survey is 10 years after the first survey, 41% of all gamers are female identifying, which is up, 10% from just a few years prior. So it's interesting what's been happening. So that's what the show is about. I'm really excited to have the audience walk into this phenomenal space where we get to play with reality and play with reality with the audience too. So is the audience watching something happening or are they watching something virtual? So we get to play with that a bit.
It's fascinating. I'm so excited to see the play coming back. And I don't know if I mentioned, but Kirsten's not only the playwright, but the director. So she is really immersed in this. And she said such an interesting thing. You said, I miss the actors, but I really miss the characters too.
And we're
Yeah.
really fortunate that all the actors are coming back that started originating these roles. So I'm forever grateful to them.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to show a slideshow that has some images from Factory of the Sun and also some images of the 2020, the shortened 2020 production of Coded. And Coded has also added another actress since then. So it's still an all-female cast. We've added someone new. And let me just spotlight myself, and I'm going to show you the slideshow. Some of you may recognize the music, but only those of you who've been coming to City Lights for a while. The music there, just a piece of trivia, was written by our in-house sound designer and composer, George Saris, for our 2015 production of Build, which was another play about video game creators. So I just borrowed that music because it went so well with this. Such cool visuals, right? And I was fortunate enough to get a little preview of Factory of the Sun, and I am just so excited to see it. One of you already mentioned the holodeck, Kirsten. One of the things that I love about these two works is that they explore similar concepts, but they often go down such interesting paths and very different paths. Now, both works kind of have a holodeck involved. Kirsten, you talked about yours. You can tell us a little bit more, but also Kathryn said the Factory of the Sun has the opposite of a holodeck, which is really cool. Kathryn, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, in Factory of the Sun, the holodeck has kind of two operational modes. The set design for it that you saw in those images is inspired by the Star Trekian holodeck, and one of its modes is to create a virtual world. Much as the original holodeck, it's there to transfer human bodies or the physical experience of being a human in space into what appears like another location. But the other way that Steyerl's using the holodeck is as a design for her motion capture studio that turns movement, or in this case, dancing, into light. So rather than make images appear, which is the action of bringing light into a space, it extracts light from the space. And in that sense is a kind of opposite of a holodeck.
Yes, and I am.
And so here, yeah, this image is an example of a holodeck happening in a more traditional sense, right? Of creating a virtual world for people in real space.
Just beautiful images. That silver is fantastic. And Kirsten, you talked a little bit about the holodeck. As you said, Jerry is trying to revolutionize virtual reality gaming. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, VR and AR are, huge tools in not just gaming, but sort of in training. I actually have been taking classes. I teach at San Jose State, and I've been working on creating a virtual reality space for my students to actually practice vocal techniques. And we'll see, how that comes about as we're working to kind of develop new platforms. But VR platforms exist. A lot of people know augmented reality as well. Either it's the Pokemon Go or the Harry Potter thing, very similar game. But in this world, which is set in the not too distant future, they've created technology using haptics. Haptics are things that kind of like your phone vibrates, or you kind of feel something like it in your game controller, where they could sort of create this space. And if you've seen something like Ready Player One, and you see that they're wearing all those vests and they're on treadmills, just sort of, and wearing their goggles to be in the space, our idea is that we're able to do without it, more of a Star Trek sort of idea. But our game space, there's a big argument and jokes in the play about, is it for gaming, like fantasy role playing, or is it more for education and therapeutic purposes? And I like to think it could be used for both. It could be used for, hey, and the big running gag in the show, which it's not really giving anything away, is, a surgeon could practice operating on somebody in a virtual place instead of actually on a human person. And actually do some testing and try things out before you actually go do it for real. And if it's more realistic, the more successful that sort of training can be. So we're looking at that, but we're also talking about sort of the ethical boundaries that a space like that can afford. And is it programmable by anyone to create anything they want to have happen in this space? Or is it, what's the ethical and moral responsibilities of the creators in a space like this? So, I don't know about anybody else, but when I was a kid and watching Next Gen, I was obsessed with the Holodeck. I thought it was the coolest space. But really, for me, it was all about, role playing and being able to, be Sherlock Holmes or whoever I wanted to be. And so in our space, we do sort of touch on the ideas of the ethical implications of that space. We're not
Kind of leads us
far, but we are really far from creating that, according to the people I've talked to.
possibly, right?
I always hear the opposite.
Yeah.
We're right there.
We're almost there.
Well, it's interesting. The people, I've talked to a couple, game designers, and I'm like, how close are we? And they're like, to the what you're imagining, really far away.
Right. It's like what you're imagining is not going to happen.
What we're imagining is like being able to walk into a room and like fight with somebody and feel it. But what's possible is what we have now in these VR platforms and a lot of this new haptic technology. Self-driving cars, for goodness sake. There's a lot going on that is actually, I think, shifting the field. I'm not an expert in the field. I've just done my research for the show, but it's exciting, but it's also scary.
Which also leads me into one of the other things I want to talk about. And you brought this up, Kirsten, the first time we talked about control and agency. And both of these works delve into those themes where you have Factory of the Sun, you have massively powerful corporations, you have surveillance, and Coded talks about non-playing characters who maybe might not have the agency of other characters, but they certainly play a role as well. And I'd love to have both of you talk about ways that these works explore control and agency that's meaningful to you. Kathryn, you want to go first?
Sure. Actually, non-playable characters are in both the play and the video, and serve in some ways to remind the viewer that in Styrel's work anyway, to suggest that the game is playing you, that you are not in control, whether you think you're behind the wheel or behind the controller or not. Factory of the Sun uses a video game to guide the narrative, and you, as the viewer, are told this is not game, but it's reality. So there's always the line between fact and fiction that's just surely being blurred. And then building the narrative on a viral YouTube dance phenomenon, a dancer whose video that he made in his parents' basement in Edmonton, Canada, makes its way across the world, is memeified and becomes an inspiration for a Japanese anime character. It really seems on the surface like a fairly harmless case of globalism. But internet virality creates corporate capital. There's really nothing harmless or innocent about this. And the digital economy is just completely reliant on human resources. So in this case, it's dancing, but in our lives, it's also like every TikTok video, every mile tracked on your Strava, is all filling massive databanks of information that are monetized. So there's this sense that when you are using a social media platform, you are the one in control, when in fact, your resources are just being extracted.
Ooh, like the sunlight. Interesting. Kirsten, you want to talk a little bit about those concepts as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I when I talk about agency and perceived agency, I usually use the Disneyland metaphor, where you think, oh, at Disneyland, you're making all the choices to control, you're in control of your imagination and what happens, but it's actually a heavily controlled environment. Everything is there to manipulate how you move through a space. So if anybody's been to Disneyland, think about, oh, you see something and it's called the weenie, because Walt liked hot dogs, and it beckons you to a certain land or a certain place. And so you are actually really controlled. So that kind of played out in creating the game within Coded, because what you want when you're playing a video game or any game, to have perceived agency, to be making the decisions that that you're in control of the gameplay, but actually there is obstacles being put in your way to kind of send you, even though you're making a choice at the fork in the road, they're all created to lead you on a certain trajectory. And so we're thinking about what is the outcome then? What do we want? How do we want audiences, the gamer, to feel when they're playing the game? Do we want them to feel that they can't get past a certain level, or that they're learning as they play through? And the non-playing characters really do serve an important purpose, and even in my play, in that they're that immovable character that will tell you, no, this is how you have to do it, because they're an NPC is a non-playing character. You can't play that person. They're on a certain path, and however you relate to them is how they're going to relate back to you. But there's a set things that have to happen, that will happen, that are inevitable in the game. And so really it's about who's controlling the gameplay. And when you're playing, you want to think it's you, and you want to feel that it's you, but in actuality, you're being set on this trajectory. Now you can stop the game and and replay it and get a completely different outcome, but that's still an outcome that has been designed for you. So it's interesting. And I think one of the things Kathryn mentioned, which was about the digital economy, and in my show, I have two characters who, Izzy and Ash, and Izzy's dropped out of Stanford and wants to become a YouTuber, but she hasn't quite figured out what her niche is going to be. But that idea of sort of having your career as a YouTuber, making money in that digital economy, and what that means, and who are you in that, what are you, a character in this digital world, in this YouTube world that you're putting on? How are you selling yourself in this digital economy? I think those are all really interesting questions. I don't answer any of them for you in my play, of course. It's for you to kind of have a dialogue about afterwards, but I find them endlessly fascinating as I watch all of these. I watch a lot of gameplay YouTube videos, so it's really interesting to see. And just today I watched a YouTuber play a game, and he said, oh, I think I've played this before. And he found the video from like 4 years ago. We had played that game before. And he actually started critiquing his own performance and going, why am I putting on that voice? What's wrong with me? Oh, I was creating a performance. And it got really meta. But this YouTuber also has a huge following, several double-digit millions, and is, you know, making a living doing this. And so that digital economy is a really interesting thing. And if you subscribe, how much of your information do they have? Interesting.
It seems like just some harmless little clicks, but it's all being gathered somewhere. Yeah, yeah. And speaking of info being gathered, Kathryn was telling me about something in Factory of the Sun about the Twiffelsburg Towers, that this is this very strong visual. Tell us the story about it. I had not heard about this at all.
Yeah, sure. So the Teufelberg Towers in Berlin are the now defunct remnant of the Cold War, and they're a backdrop to much of Factory of the Sun. They're one of the backdrops that's created from the holodeck. And during the Cold War, the NSA built a listening station to pick up on Soviet communications in East Germany. And this location where they built the Teufelsberg Tower is a hill that's made out of rubble. It's Nazi era technological trash. So in Factory of the Sun, the Teufelsberg Towers are the site of a corporate campus. They're Deutsche Bank's headquarters. And so he just really drawing out this lineage of the way that technology is developed for military purposes and adopted by corporations for capitalistic purposes, and then often used against its citizens. And we see this in most surveillance technology that was developed for military purposes and you know, used by police against citizens.
And Hito, of course, is a German artist, and I imagine she's more well known in Europe than she is here, though of course she's well known here as well. I'd like to hear about how you got introduced to her work, what your connection is with her.
Yeah, sure. I first came across her work via her writing, because she's a kind of theorist, she's a writer, she's a filmmaker. She put out a piece in 2009 called "In Defense of the Poor Image," where she was really looking at the mass distribution of images and how the acceleration of distribution lowers the quality of images. And we often attribute value, the value of images is a direct tie to their quality. So for example, cinematic images, really high resolution, their value is very safely guarded so that they are not, you know, traded as thumbnails or squeezed through poor internet connections or distributed for free. And in this essay, the defense looks at the social values within poor images, that those social values have a kind of a value that itself becomes an aesthetic. I then saw her work in 2015 at the Venice Biennale when Factory of the Sun debuted. And I've described this experience before as like akin to the terror and excitement of falling in love. I was in Venice after all. And so I fell in love with an artwork, but I couldn't get the images from the video out of my head. I mean, just for months they were bumping around, really for years, and they're quite disturbing. They're compelling. They're like, I often, you know, I was just trying to make sense of them. And then when I started at the San Jose Museum of Art 2 years later, SJMA had just acquired this piece. And so I was thrilled that it was in our collection. And in our collection, it's in conversation with works like Listening Post that was on view. Some of you might be familiar with that piece. It was on view in Almost Human a year ago or 2 years ago. And that piece was made in 2001. And is a kind of utopic look at the internet and at internet communication, whereas only 15 years, even less than 15 years later, Hito's Factory of the Sun is totally dystopic. So, you know, it's interesting to see how quickly things changed.
And yet, you said it's
And
funny.
yet,
It's funny how pleasurable it is to watch. That was another thing that you said that I was like, it is. It's dystopic, and yet you get pulled in. And coded as well. They're both works that have a lot of darkness in them, but they have a lot of humor. They have lightness. Kathryn, tell me about some of that in Factory, and then we'll jump to you, Kirsten.
Well, I mean, for one, Factory of the Sun has a great soundtrack. So it's, and there's dancing. And so there is this light spiritedness to it. And I think part of what the reason, the conceptual reason behind that is really because our experience of the internet and of, you know, freely giving away our information is a very pleasurable one. We're a complete addicts, right, to scrolling Instagram. We like, this is like filling us with endorphins, and it is a pleasurable experience. So there's that side that's pleasure and the side that's total peril as well.
It's very interesting. Yeah. So Kirsten, you have certainly darkness and light. Maybe we should talk about darkness more first, but as you said, the darkness of women dealing with the boys club of the industry, and you have the main character who's faced these horrible trolls. And how realistic is this story? I know you did a lot of research.
I did, and when I was talking to some some women who are game designers, and I actually was really excited about, you know, the show. And then she turned to me and said, "Are you afraid?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Are you at all scared about what's going to happen to you in writing this play?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? What's going to happen to me?" She's like, "You're writing a play that's not going to make a lot of people happy." And I got a little freaked out about it. And I had done my research, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm actually putting a light on something that not a lot of people know about. And I'm, you know, like, okay, well, I'm going to do it, because I think that we hear about trolls, but we don't hear about the venom and how utterly frightening and how much trauma this puts women through. And we do quote, we actually, you know, kind of warned the audience that we do quote, or I've taken some actual troll statements. There's websites where you can see what trolls have said to women. I've taken some of those and kind of put them together. I've written a couple myself, which was incredibly upsetting to do. But it's a real thing. In fact, Anita Sarkeesian, who years ago started a YouTube channel and a website called Feminist Frequency, just last year, right as we were opening, created, and I actually pulled it up on my screen, a games and online harassment hotline to help women and people who identify as female, LGBTQ plus folks who are being horribly harassed online for gaming, to help them. It is vile, it is terrifying, and so many gamers, women, game designers, women in the field have had to make sure that their information is not out there, because they could be getting doxxed. Anita Sarkeesian, for example, I mean, her tropes and gameplay, where she takes down Grand Theft Auto or any of the other sort of more sexist games, she has been threatened. Venues where she's speaking have been bomb threatened, just to stop her from talking. And with Gamergate, which happened many years ago, yeah, this is real. It is real. And the last several years have just inflated that attack against women. And I talked about how there are more women gamers now, and the same study I read also said then there's more toxicity against them in the field. So yeah, it's intense, this dark side of it, but women have been gaming all along. I had a Commodore 64 and playing Quest of the Avatar back in the days. Back when I had an Atari, I had an Intellivision. I love gaming. My daughter loves gaming. And I've got a gazillion game platforms and consoles in my house. And it's just, it's upsetting that there's a perceived, there's a perception that women are allowed, and there's these gatekeepers that are trying to stop people from getting into this when they're high consumers in game design. So there is a dark side, absolutely, to it. And that's really one of the things I wanted to just kind of talk. Now, the whole play is not about that, but it is a pulse that runs through of women. This is what we have to deal with. This is what we, and how can we make that stop? And so the fact that there is now an online harassment hotline to help women and people who have been harassed, and violently. I mean, some of the things I won't even say because it's just distressing. It's distressing. We had to have I said, hey, everybody, we're going to do this scene now. And we did it the first time. And they're like, these aren't real. And I'm like, they are. There's an interesting documentary called GTFO, Get the F Out, that you can watch that really it's older, but it really does talk about what women go through in this field, the misogyny in tournaments, not just online gameplay, but in general. So there is a definite dark side to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, something that we talked about is just how unregulated these spaces are, right? And that there's something seemingly potentially utopic about that, but the way that it actually plays out is really dark.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I I had mentioned, part of me got interested in this also because my daughter wants to go into game design, and she took a course, and she was the only female identifying person in this class. And she was 12 or 13 when she took this course. She's a couple years older now, but the teacher of this class was a woman who said, you know what you're getting into, right, with this? And I said, I think so. But I will say that every man in that class with her was incredibly respectful, and that gave me hope. But yeah, it's interesting to sort of dive deep into this, and it is an unregulated space, and it's on the players to report other players, if they're, and getting them kicked, saying, hey, this is not appropriate conversation, what you just said, besides phishing and all that. I mean, there's all this other stuff going on. It can be a scary place, the internet and gaming.
Yeah. But your play also shows the excitement of creating, of inspiration, just the wonder of, it's called The Room.
Right.
The Holodeck is called The Room in your play. And yeah, lest everyone think that it's an extremely dark play, there is a lot of joy and wonder and humor. Tell us about that as well.
Oh, I mean, I think the humor comes from the fact that everybody, well, the humor's in the fact that games are fun. The humor's in the fact that we love role playing, that we get to be somebody we're not for 5 seconds, or maybe we are who we are, but we get to put ourselves in extraordinary circumstances for a bit. And that can be fun and joyous. It's also, a lot of the characters, although they take themselves seriously, are big messy people and they're human. And that's also, a lot of the humor comes from being able to see their interactions with one another and just kind of embracing each other for who they are and not having to be somebody else in the workplace. And that was a big thing for me in creating this play, was to create an environment for these characters where they could truly be themselves and not have to hide or put on a face because they're at work. They can just be their selves with their child's vomit all over their shirt that they forgot to wipe off from that morning or whatever it may be. And I think that's where a lot of the humor in the play comes from, is the solidarity of women in the piece, but also the joy of creation, the joy of gaming. It's fun. That's why we do it. It's because there's a joy in that. And also when we see ourselves reflected in the game. Like that's one of the also the things that sort of these trolls, I'm just going to call them trolls. These trolls are objecting to is the shift from a male-dominated gaze to a more inclusive, accessible point of view in gaming, and they're feeling that their games are being taken away. It's like actually they're not. The table's just getting bigger. So if you're looking for what you want, it's there, but being able to share that space. So yeah, it is very funny. I love humor. I think we laugh. If we're laughing, we're listening. So I am a big fan of just, you know, highbrow and lowbrow humor. So.
And your characters are from different generations, which I like. It's not just like the young kids creating the tech. There are different generations. You've got someone with a family, you've got single people, you've got someone who's been in the industry longer. And so they all have different stories to tell.
Yeah, we've got, you know, 3 different waves of feminism represented in the story. We've got, you know, somebody who's skirting the boomers. We've got a few Gen Xers, and we've got millennials, and it's now Gen Z, kind of represented in the show. And I think that also allows for a really interesting conversation about where we've been and where we're going, and what women, you know, I wanted to see women my age on stage. And so it's really important to me to write characters, you know, that women my age can play, that aren't just moms or a shop owner or the maid. So it was really important to see them having agency and controlling their fate and their destiny. And there's really no romance in this, you know, there's no romance in the show except for the love of creation. So, and that's refreshing for me anyway.
Well said. Well said. I'm going to open this up for audience questions. You are welcome to turn on your cameras and ask that way. You're welcome to type questions into the chat. You're welcome to just, you know, raise your hand, all the things. And while you're thinking up questions, I just want to let you know. So Coded opens this fall. As I said, it opens City Light's reopening season. Preview performances September 16th and 17th, with opening night on Saturday, September 18th. And I'm excited to say that opening night is filling up. We have, it's not full yet, but we have our theater, for those of you who don't know, is a small theater on South 2nd Street. We have 100 seats in the house. And for the first time this season, we're doing reserved seating, just to make it more comfortable for people. You might not want to come on a night that's as full. You want to know where you're going to sit, that kind of thing. But it's exciting for me as the marketing person to watch those seats fill up. So, and Kathryn, the installation opens on the 6th, and I believe you said it's going to be open for about a year?
Yeah, it'll be open through fall 2022. And the space is likewise quite safe. It's extremely well ventilated. And probably one of the safest spaces in the museum, despite the fact that it is within a kind of theater closed box environment. We also have an event happening this fall online, a conversation with Hito Steirel, who will be in Berlin, so she'll be joining us via Zoom, but she'll be in conversation with her friend, the artist Trevor Paglin, who also will have a newly commissioned sound work installed at SJMA this fall. So we're thrilled to have them in conversation because Trevor's work also examines surveillance and the kind of governmental bodies and programs that have watched and controlled human populations. He's coming from a photographic background, and Hito, of course, from a cinematic one. And so the two of them in conversation should be a lot of fun. And that's happening at noon on October 12th. And you can sign up for that through SJMA's website, on our events page, or through the exhibition website.
And I was going to ask Robin, who's here from the museum, if you could put some of that in the chat.
So yeah, that'd be great, Robin. Thank you.
Yeah. And City Light's website is cltc.org. And of course, if you signed up for this, you've been there, so you know. Anyone have any questions for our artists here today? You are a quiet group, but you are a group of good listeners, I must say. And I think we even have a relative of Kathryn here. Hello. Welcome. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi, Mom. Do you have any questions? Or have you heard about Hito Steyerl's Factory of the Sun since 2015 when I first saw it?
Right. We've been hearing about it for quite a while.
Waiting.
And actually, I'm just so impressed. It's so interesting talking about these two things together, that a play and then the art exhibition, and kind of pulling the things together that they both have. It just, don't usually just see that, and it's fascinating.
Oh, great. Yeah, we just
also, I mean, one of the exciting things too is how both theater and cinema, of course, play with reality, and what is real and what is not. And so that's an exciting part of this too.
Indeed. I saw Daniel turned on his camera. I was going to see if he had a question, but then he went away, so never mind. There was another thing I didn't ask about, but what I thought was interesting when I watched the video, and we both talked about it a little bit, is the concept of life and death, and the sort of the fact that you die in a video game, but you don't actually die. You have that whole concept of respawning, and that was interesting. There's also something in Factory of the Sun where people are talking about being student protests, and something has happened to them, and they say things like, oh, I was shot 3 times. Like, they just kept coming back. And you wonder the effect on people who play. Do they think about life and death in a different way? Do you want to talk to that issue at all? I sprang that one on you, didn't I?
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, this idea of respawning, and again, like it really plays with ideas of reality and fiction, and that in that in this virtual world where bodies can respawn, like, what is the value of a human life? When a drone is taking down protesters and is like a digitally manned drone, what is the value of a human life? So I think, Hito's really touching on that. And in particular, just how I think video gameplay can change the way that we perceive reality and the way we perceive life itself and the value of a human life. I mean, it's just so tied to warfare.
Oh, we have a nice comment in the chat here. Thank you for bringing Hito's work to San Jose. Very excited to come see it. And I believe that the installation is a co-production. I don't know if that's the right word with museums, but it's a collaborative project with several other organizations as well.
It was co-acquired into our collection. So with the Hammer Museum and the MCA Chicago, we all pooled our funds and bought this work so that all 3 organizations can share it with our communities.
That's interesting. I didn't know that museums did that.
It's actually a pretty rare occurrence, but doing it more and more now, and in some ways makes a lot of sense with digital art or video, because it doesn't require shipping between institutions.
course.
and doesn't put an enormous storage burden on a single institution. But yeah, it's a wonderful way for museums to just be more economic.
Fascinating. Kirsten, I didn't let you talk. Did you want to talk? Did you have something else you wanted to say about the topic of respawning and life in video games?
You know, I was watching a gameplay, you know, and I was like, is he gonna lose everything if he respawns? You know, so I mean, that's the big thing in gaming. It's right. If you die, do you lose everything you've got, or do you get to keep it and you just kind of respawn at that sort of moment? And games are so different. Like sometimes you got to go back to the beginning, and sometimes, whew, you're just back where you last saved. And all of those things can be very, they can be very different. But I think this question though of reality is such an interesting one, and one of the things I'm still, you know, it's really weird to be a writer and directing the piece you wrote, because as a director you get surprised by what the writer did, and as the writer you're like, I'll let the director figure that out. And just today I was just kind of retooling, because I'm have this opportunity to retool the play as to what worked and what didn't work. And I was just kind of retooling just a little scene, and I'm like, oh, is that character in a reality state for them, or is that them playing? And I got myself very confused about reality and what's real for the character and what's not. And that was great, because I think that a couple of the characters in the play get so caught up in the narrative of the game they're creating that they lose sight, and they have an actual, you know, emotional involvement and attachment to a non-playing character that is potentially very dangerous. You know, it's interesting, as actors, we're trained to play fantasy and then leave that when we walked out, you know, but people who, you know, but it's not something trained for people who do a lot of gaming. I mean, I think role players, you know, D&D and stuff that's actually prime for video games, because they're used to role playing and then walking away. But it's fascinating. There's a lot of studies out, you know, about games and kids, but how games can also be helpful in learning. So, you know, it's this weird double-edged sword. And now I'm just rambling. So
Your rambling's always fascinating. And you made a point that I don't think that we said was a kind of a silver lining to having the show canceled before opening night, is that you saw the preview performances up on stage, and then you decided, well, there's some things I want to change about the script.
yeah.
And you had lots of time to do it.
Well, it was interesting because, you know, you always go, okay, that's the first production, and I'm going to go, you know, you're going to learn from the audience. You're going to rewrite. I had 2 audiences to learn from, and there were great, super supportive audiences that got sort of everything. And then in the last year, I've had the opportunity to kind of talk to people that don't game and don't ever do anything other than now Zoom, who've looked at the play and gone, and I've asked them, I said, does all this make sense to you? Because there's a lot of lingo. And they're like, oh yeah, it does make sense. And I'm like, because I didn't want there to be a barrier, because people are like, oh, I don't game, so I'm not going to get it. You don't need to game in order to get it. You know, it's yeah, there'll be a couple words here and there, but if you know, it's just a word here and there that you're like, I don't know what that is. Oh, but now I get what they're talking about. And I think that's really helpful, to have been able to have the opportunity to just let a couple of people read the text. But also we added we decided to add another character, well, not another character, another actor to our, and it was a very strategic add to help the audience not get confused. And that's all I'm going to say.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. So I have 6 phenomenal women in this show that I'm super jazzed about.
It's a great team. And then all the designers came back, lighting and
So delightful.
that costume.
I know, part of me is like, do I want to change too much to make them go crazy, or no?
Exciting.
But I do think it's interesting how this past year then has really changed how much we all know and think about virtual space, and think about embodiment and disembodiment. You know, our like weird little talking heads right now. and it's, I mean, certainly for Hito's Gyro's Factory of the Sun, I think makes it a much more relatable and understandable piece now than it was in 2015, when I think it was quite prophetic, but also confounding.
Yeah. No, I think that this last year has really done so much to us as humans, just in terms of how we relate and what community means and what it means to be present with someone. Because we don't know what's going on off stage of anyone's camera. Like, I don't know if you just heard my dogs barking, but they decided to let their presence be known. There's a whole world outside of the box, and I think that's really interesting. And one of the things I've been trying to do is figure out a way to weave in the COVID quarantine and lockdowns, and how that this is now they're coming out of that, and how we're just referencing back to, oh yeah, well, we learned anything from COVID. We learned how virtual spaces can be very important in establishing community, right? So you just can't hug. But if we had a room you could go to with somebody else and actually hug them, and it's not a real hug, but you've got some technology that makes you feel like you're getting a hug, would that be more helpful? So it's interesting.
Fascinating.
The disembodiment, right, is and liveness. This is something, and I don't know if this technology is going to go away for theater. I mean, I think we're still going to be looking at Zoom things and creating community through telematic means.
I knew you both would be just fascinating interviews. I could tell, and especially when you both met on Zoom for the first time. Just fascinating. This has been a terrific evening. If anyone has any last questions or comments, feel free to type them into the chat or say them out loud. And Kathryn or Kirsten, any last words before we finish up?
I am just delighted to have this opportunity to bring the show back. I think it's funny. It is funny and dark and funny. And I'm just so thankful for all of you for coming and listening to this conversation. And I'm super excited to go to the museum and see this piece. I'm kind of in awe, and can't wait to hear the talk as well.
I'm likewise really excited to see your play, and to have Hito's work on view at the museum for a year. I know where I'm going to be spending all of my time, and that is in that exhibition. Because every time I watch it, it just, I mean, a new door opens. It's a fantastic piece, and I'm really excited to share it with San Jose.
That's wonderful. Special thanks to San Jose Museum of Art. It's been really wonderful teaming up with you in your Third Thursday program. This is actually the second time we had San Jose Museum of Art on the next stage. We had some educational artist educators before, and we did some paper projects here. And it's just, it's wonderful collaborating with you. I can't wait to get back to the museum. And thank you. Oh, and Robin mentions SJMA is now open Friday through Sunday, 11 to 6. Are there masking, vax rules? How does it work going to the museum, or is it just open?
So yes, the museum is open. We are still requiring masking because we serve a multi-generational audience, and I think a lot of people have forgotten that little kids still can't get vaccinated. So we're really interested in protecting everybody. So yes, masks are still required inside the museum, but we are open now Friday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And the cafe is open to the Cafecito, run by Mezcal behind us. So that's open as well. So we hope that people will come in and visit. We've done everything we can to make it as safe of an environment as possible for everybody. So we've been very mindful of that and cautious, and understand that people will have different comfort levels in coming back. But as Kathryn said too, we've taken extraordinary measures to make sure that this piece is really safe as well for people to view. So yeah, we're happy to have everybody back.
Yeah.
We can't wait to see the play.
Yeah, at City Lights, we're dedicating 2 performances of each of our first 2 shows. One is masked for audiences to wear masks, and another one will be requiring proof of vaccination. And we're trying that out. We want to make sure that people feel comfortable either way. So there will be a couple of performances like that. We also have our scenic designer is a trained COVID compliance officer. So we have more, I know he is. And so we have more hand sanitizer and defogging cleaners and 95 masks in our lobby right now than you could possibly imagine. So we're all just, yeah, we're doing whatever we can to keep people feeling comfortable and as safe as possible in our facility.
It's like Kirsten said, we've all had to explore the digital space, but we've all had to learn how to wear other hats too in terms of health and safety compliance that nobody's ever thought about before. So
I know. Hey, I'm the marketing director, and here I am running an online series. So,
so there you go, and doing a fine job of it too.
Thank you.
So we're always so thrilled to partner with City Lights. So really, it's been great to be here tonight, Becky. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin. And the next stage will be back here in Zoom next week. We have a music performance by a singer-songwriter named Amy Owenski. And she's a San Francisco singer-songwriter, but also spent a lot of time in Santa Cruz. Kirsten, you might know her. And she uses live looping technology. So while she's singing, she sometimes creates percussion sounds with her mouth, or she busts out a guitar or piano and combines it all and makes these wonderful soundscapes. She's had a song, Carousel, that was on Grey's Anatomy. She's very soulful. And
what's her name again?
Amy Owenski.
I do know who she is.
Yeah, so she'll be on next
great.
week. Yeah, so that'll be a lot of fun.
Oh,
Suzette says, terrific perspectives. Thank you so much. Thank you, Suzette, over there in the chat. All righty. Been a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much for taking part, for being here. And we look forward to welcoming you to City Lights and the museum before too long. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.